Forced out, the former American ambassador to Ukraine tells lawmakers that President Trump pressed to have her fired. Lisa Desjardins breaks down how her testimony is the latest twist in the escalating impeachment inquiry.
From her first steps on Capitol Hill today, former ambassador to Ukraine Marie Yovanovitch entered and added to a political drama. The career diplomat arrived after the State Department told her last night she was not permitted to speak to lawmakers voluntarily. The solution? House Democrats quickly issued a subpoena, allowing her to say she was legally compelled to attend. Yovanovitch was recalled from her post in May amidst charges from Rudy Giuliani and in conservative media that she had spoken out against the president. She blasted back at those ideas in her opening remarks behind closed doors today. Multiple news outlets obtained them. She said her removal was based on, quote, unfounded and false claims. And Yovanovitch said the State Department has been attacked and hollowed out from within. And if the diplomatic corps is not rebuilt, she fears that will harm our nation's interests, perhaps irreparably. Yovanovitch is central to much of the impeachment investigation. Her ousting was cited in the whistleblower's complaint at the heart of that inquiry. During the July 25th phone call that triggered that complaint, President Trump spoke out against her to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He said, quote, the woman was bad news, and added, she's going to go through some things. And according to an indictment handed up yesterday, also working to remove her were Igor Fruman and Lev Parnas, two men who say they were working for Rudy Giuliani and the president. The federal indictment charges Parnas' efforts to remove the ambassador, that's Yovanovitch, were conducted at least in part at the request of one or more Ukrainian officials. Also today, news that Gordon Sondland will testify next week. Sondland is the ambassador to the EU, and text messages show he was involved in discussions about President Trump and what he wanted from Ukraine. Last night, Mr. Trump campaigned in Minneapolis, leveling more criticism at his opponents in Congress.
These are bad people. My phone call, as an example, with the president of Ukraine was perfect.
The president rallied supporters, telling them their views are at stake.
They want to erase your vote like it never existed. They want to erase your voice, and they want to erase your future.
The president is holding another rally tonight in Louisiana.
And Lisa is here with me now, along with our Yamiche Alcindor, who's been tracking today's developments from the White House. So, Lisa, let's go back to former Ambassador Yovanovitch. Tell us again who she is and what more do we know about what she said today?
Well, she is still with the State Department. So in doing this, she was kind of bucking the high command, although getting that subpoena to her gave her a legal reason for showing up. I'm going to come back to that. But her statement, Judy, was extraordinary on a few levels. She also fired back and said she has never, for example, met Hunter Biden. She never advocated on behalf of Hillary Clinton or President Obama, as some of her critics have alleged. And Judy, she went on to lay out her suspicion that the reason she was being pushed out by some, I think she's implying Rudy Giuliani's associates, was for their financial interests. She says she was fighting corruption in Ukraine and that was a problem for some who were trying to make use of that corruption for their own financial gain. Judy, she also said she's incredulous over the fact that she was removed overall. This is all very important also for two other reasons. One, she's laying out a case here about corruption potentially within the Trump administration. Two, Judy, she submitted to this subpoena. She complied with a subpoena. The more that Trump administration officials don't do that, and some like her do comply, Democrats will try and build a case for obstruction of justice for that.
Oh, so much. Yamiche, you've been talking to folks at the White House. What are they saying in their defense, and what do they see as their strategy going forward here?
Well, President Trump is really pushing back on the ambassador's claims that he personally was pushing to have her removed from her post. Today on the White House lawn, the president said, I don't know this woman. I'm sure she's wonderful, but I have nothing to do with her. So the president is really trying to put distance between himself and the ambassador's claims. Now, Stephen Miller, the president's senior advisor, was out today speaking to reporters, and he told us that he really believes that this is all part of partisan hatred toward the president. So their strategy really is to say that the Democrats are doing this because they don't want the president to be in office. They want to overturn the 2016 election. So it's a lot of messaging from the White House on that front. But Democrats, of course, push back and say that that's not what this is about. This is about getting to the truth. Add to that Stephen Miller, when asked over and over again whether or not he would personally comply with the subpoena to testify before the House, he said, I don't want to answer that, refused to answer. And when the president was asked, well, what do you make of Ambassador Sondland coming next week and Ambassador Yovanovitch coming today, he said, kind of shrugged his fingers and said, you know what? I don't like anybody testifying. I don't want anyone testifying. So the White House's strategy still is to try to block people from testifying and to try to not comply with any document requests. But the president, in some ways, is still stuck in this position where ambassadors can come and say that they are legally obligated to come before the House.
So, Lisa, what are, at this point, the next steps for the Democrats in Congress?
Democrats just in the last hour got off a conference call, House Democrats with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff, talking about their messaging. Remember, Congress comes back next week. So the dynamics are going to be critical when lawmakers from both parties return. They want to have a serious look at impeachment. They're still going to try and get out that they're working on other issues. They want that to be part of the narrative. It's going to be difficult when you're talking about impeachment, but they're going to try. Judy, something else going on today. I've learned, and some others have reported as well, that House Republicans have a new concern about the president, and they are moving on it, and that has to do with Turkey. House Republicans are joining with House Democrats on the Foreign Affairs Committee to propose some legislation that would sanction Turkey. This would be beyond what the president and the Treasury Secretary have been talking to. It would be much sharper sanctions. This would be a rebuke of the president's policies. We're waiting now for that legislation.
And speaking of Turkey, Yamiche, we saw that the Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, announced today that they are putting in place sanctions that they could impose on Turkey down the line. What do we know about that, the thinking that went into this?
Well, both Steve Mnuchin and the president both say that these are authorized sanctions, but they're not actually issuing these sanctions. So this is really the Trump administration and President Trump himself responding to that bipartisan criticism that Lisa's talking about. The president feels as though his party is definitely making noise about this and sustained noise about this. So he wants to say, look, if Turkey gets out of line, we have something ready to do that. On the White House lawn, the president said, I'm ready to wipe out Turkey's entire economy if needed. That said, when the administration is pushed to say, well, how is this going to help the Kurds, and how is this going to help people, our former allies who are now fearing for their lives? They said, well, it's a complicated military situation there, and we can't really answer that question. So the president's really trying at his best here to try to deal with some of this criticism. But most people are saying that these do not go far enough. And obviously, as you can see in the House and in Congress, lawmakers themselves are banding together to do even more than the president is doing.
Again, so much to follow. It has been an extraordinary week. Yamiche Alcindor, Lisa Desjardins, thank you both.